On today's episode, we're going to spend a lot of time on facts or cap segments, three specific questions that have been asked around Bulls social media from fans. One, it's a mindset that I've seen a lot of fans have and some other Bulls podcasters that the Chicago Bulls have been nothing for their future other than drafting Caleb Wilson this offseason. I'm going to actually fight back against that because Norman Powell is actually exactly what Caleb Wilson needs in this rookie year, and I think people are overlooking how much that actually helps the future for the Chicago Bulls. Also, we're going to be talking about the viral sensation that went around Bulls social media for a few days last week in regard to what position is best for Josh Giddey. Some seem to think that he should be more of a shooting guard and wing than a point guard, and I just think that the data doesn't support that. We're going to talk about that on today's episode as well. And then finally, Noa Essengue. What does the future hold for Noa Essengue, and has what he's done in Summer League or not done already doomed his future? We're going to talk about all these things plus more right after this. What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. So the first thing that I want to talk about, I already said we're spending a lot of time on facts or cap, is that Norman Powell, well, more so what the Bulls have done this offseason, right? Some people seem to think, and people that I respect, right? This isn't anything of me coming at anybody or anything like that, but there is a feeling around that I was kind of surprised by, that there are a lot of Bulls fans that seem to feel like, you know, the Bulls did nothing to help the Chicago Bulls future. And the one thing that they did do is Caleb Wilson. Some people are automatically looking at, well, the Bulls drafted Caleb Wilson and you don't get any credit for that. And, you know, this kind of all started when I posted my my reaction to ESPN's ranking of the Chicago Bulls offseason, right? It came down to that, where I called out some of their logic in their things. People brought their own logic to this situation, and I think this, right? Like, people look at it and say, well, the Bulls added no long-term free agent. The Bulls, you know, they the number 15th overall pick, Dailyn Swain, looks bad right now, right? And these are all fair things, but I do think that some of the conversation loses a lot of nuance, because what you do early in a rookie's career definitely has a part in your future. Giving Caleb Wilson the ball and just saying, go get it, is not, even though Caleb Wilson has the type of mindset that he'll do that if that's what you ask him for, that's not typically the best way to develop a player. I've said it before. When you go through and look at the best development teams, about 30 to 35% of their minutes goes to NBA veterans, right? And you help that. You help cultivate that in regards to that. And the Chicago Bulls help bring that in, and bringing in Norman Powell, bringing in Nick Claxton, right? Bringing in guys that help the Chicago Bulls play style while also alleviating some of that duty while not getting long-term money. And I think that, you know, and I get it. You don't want to compare everything to AK, because AK was so inept at his job. But the fact that we got Nick Claxton and Norman Powell for no long-term bad money, I think says a lot. And, you know, Bulls fans are like, well, you cost yourself opportunity to go get Nick Claxton. Yeah, opportunity in what? Where you're going to go sign Mitchell Robinson? You weren't going to give that deal to Walker Kessler. You weren't going to give up 2 first-round picks in the signing trade for Walker Kessler. You weren't going to do that. The contract value itself isn't bad, but you weren't going to give up 2 first-round picks to do a signing trade. That's not where the Bulls are right now, right? So, like, what cost did you lose out on in regards to that? You still had cap space to do some other things with, which you went out and got Norman Powell with. So the whole thought process that they did nothing for the future, no, you added veterans now while maintaining cap flexibility into the future. You know, even the mindset where people say, well, you didn't create cap flexibility. You did in a way, because you didn't add, like, AK. Look, the difference between AK adding DeMar and Bryson Graham adding Norman Powell comes down to this. Norman Powell is a more complimentary scorer who can be your go-to scorer now, but you didn't sign him to some major deal. And, oh, by the way, you didn't give up a future first-round pick in this sign and trade to get him either, right? So I think when you're going to talk about this cost-adverse thing, you got to talk about the totality of what it could have been. Not a lot of GMs are going to find a way to add veterans that help support the development of your youth without giving up long-term money or long-term flexibility. The Bulls did none of that, while also maintaining all the future draft picks. So I do look at that. And I think when you look at Norman Powell specifically, giving the Chicago Bulls a proven scorer who can create his own offense, which the Bulls just don't have a lot of guys that can do that, it lets Caleb Wilson grow through his mistakes without every possession depending on him right away, right? Powell's value is not just in scoring as well, it's in pressure relief and it's in the flexibility that you have with that deal for Norman Powell. Yeah, and keep in mind, you just signed a player coming off an All-Star. The last time we got a player coming off an All-Star appearance, we gave up 2 first-round picks to get Nikola Vucevic, right? So I think in regards to this, creating a scenario where your starting lineup makes a lot more sense positionally, and it allows Caleb Wilson to learn the NBA game, the physicality, the spacing, the decision-making, without it being rushed to be all on him, that's invaluable to a huge degree and to a huge margin to have that. And the Bulls didn't have that. Hell, our most veteran player before that was fucking Patrick Williams, right? So, like, it's that part in it, and I think you have to look at how that adds into it as well, right? You don't have to skip steps. Adding Norman Powell, adding Nick Claxton, it allows you to not have to skip steps to develop these guys correctly while the focus still being on it. One thing that AK lost was the focus on his young players and development to chase playing goals. The Bulls didn't do that. Even if somehow the Bulls look up and become a playing team this year, guess what? The young players are still going to have such a large role into that it doesn't come at the behest of their development. So the concept and idea to me, personally, my personal idea, you've helped the Chicago Bulls avoid a completely ugly offensive season, which it could still be rough because we still have an overall lack of shooting, right? And so now we're not entering the season with massive playoff or play-in expectations, right? We are still focused on development, and we've created an environment to where that development can be much more streamlined, much more straightforward, and more sustainable in how you develop those guys. Without Norman Powell on this team, way too much of the shot creation would fall on Modest and Caleb Wilson. But Josh Giddey's ready for that, right? You want him to create for others. That's his best role, which we'll get on Josh Giddey here in a second. But Norman Powell now can be a stabilizer. When possessions break down, you can go to Norman Powell. Also, I think the what Norman Powell's gone through in his NBA journey can help that. And for Nick Claxton, you got a stylistic center fit. Even with the questions on his defensive slide and those type of things being there, which you can look at between back injuries and the change of the defensive system that Brooklyn had, it's a combination of both of those, right, that went on. And the injury part, he's about 2 years removed from, so hopefully he's over that in regards to it. But it allows you to evaluate Caleb, Giddey, and Modest more fairly in a more even place. And then that way you have a clear idea on exactly who these guys are and who they're going to be. And I think that you can't evaluate a rookie by asking them to solve every offensive problem by November in the season. You don't have to do that now with Norman Powell there. And I think that that's something that some people are missing the nuance in that to just look at the surface level. Again, my personal opinion. But this is a living conversation. I want to hear from you guys in regards to this one. Let me know how you feel on that part down below. But then let's get into the second part of this, the second segment for this. Josh Giddey's position. Now, my boy Mike, shout out to Mike, man, who does Bulls Roundtable. Good guy, right? And I want to be clear here. Do not come in here flaming Mike or talking no crazy shit about Mike, because hopefully he's going to be in the comments of this as well. But Mike is a guy that, he started a lot of conversation. Mike Walton started a lot of conversation on Twitter when he talked about Josh Giddey being a shooting guard instead of a point guard. And, then some people even took it further, like my boy Luke, who's also from Bulls Round. The Bulls Roundtable guys are kind of crazy, right? Who's also from Bulls Roundtable. It's like, well, he's a small forward. Now, I do want to say this. I think a big part of this is it comes down to two things, right? I think, one, people have now looked at point guards, the modern point guards, as more scorers than what point guards have traditionally been. Now, that's not neither right or wrong. You can have a lot of different styles of point guards, right? Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would not have been a point guard 20 years ago. He would have been a shooting guard. Or even probably 10, 15 years ago, he would have been a shooting guard, right? And so you have that, and I think like when you have like the Derrick Rose type point guards and Cypress, that like point guards who are looked at like not only do they run the offense, but they are almost the on-ball dominant scorer, and people look at that. So anytime you do something more off-ball, people look at it as, more of a wing player. But then I also think this, right, that if Josh Giddey wasn't almost 6'9", most of these conversations people wouldn't have. People like to have the conversation, and it starts with height, right? And that's part of the problem there. And then also, people have now mistaken what positionless basketball actually means. Positionless basketball doesn't mean you play a 6'8", a 6'7" guy at center just because they're strong. Now, you can do that in some lineups, but what positionless basketball actually started off at was meaning that skill sets aren't determined by position anymore. So where you looked at a center as being a back-to-the-basket rebounder and shot blocker, Now you have centers in the league that are passers, that are three-point shooters, right? That you have those type of things. That you have now wings and small forwards that have a legitimate back to the basket game rather than being mainly perimeter driven players. That's what positionless basketball means. It's really about, your skill set doesn't determine your position anymore. That's really what it comes down to, right? You have people at every position that can do a little bit of everything. That's where basketball is going. But this conversation about Josh Giddey specifically in regards to Josh Giddey's position, I want to have a holistic conversation in regards to this, right? So dig in. We're gonna get a little basketball nerdy in regards to this one. But I do think Josh Giddey's listed position, in fairness to Mike and to other ones, matters less than his responsibilities. Now, I think when you look at the responsibilities, it's also going to paint out the position he plays, but let's focus on the responsibilities. On offense, his primary function should be setting up other players, creating offense for others. He's one of the best players at creating shots for others. Last year, Josh Giddey created 41% of the Chicago Bulls' open shots and offense, not even counting his own offense, right? So, of course, his shots that he gets would be his own. So, when you talk about a player that has the gravity to create 41% of the open shots for other team players on the team, guess what that is? That's a point guard, right? I think defensively as well, you look at him. Do you want Josh Giddey guarding the larger wings in the league? Do you want Josh Giddey guarding the larger shooting guards in the league, right? Do you want that? And I would think that when you look at this, Josh Giddey's defense, on-ball defense, is best when it's on point guards. His pick-and-roll defense is bad all the way around, right? That's why you need guys like Nick Claxton, Miles Buzelis, and Caleb Wilson that can switch. So the pick-and-roll defense is bad regardless of the position. But when you look at the defensive results, his defensive win shares, it's best when guarding point guards. He uses his size to an advantage with guarding smaller point guards that he does not have because despite him being 6'9", he's not strong as some shooting guards and some small forwards, right? Now, I will say in regards to this as well, you don't want Josh Giddey dominating the offensive possessions all the time, which is why he did have to grow as an off-ball shooter as well, which is really good in regards to that one. When you look at it, when you look at Josh Giddey's 2026 production, what does this sound like? He averaged 17 points, 8.3 rebounds, 9.1 assists. His usage rate was 23.4. His assist percentage was 41%, as I said. Assist to turnover ratio, 2.5. True shooting percentage of 56.2. Three-point percentage of 36.4 on 5.2 attempts per game, and 3.6 turnovers per game. A 41% assist ratio means that he assisted on so many of the Chicago Bulls' made baskets while he was on the floor that it's ridiculous, right? You would lose so much offensive creation if you moved him to try to make him more of an off-ball player because his magic comes when he's on the ball. Now, his 2.5 assist to turnover ratio is solid considering how much of the playmaking he's on. And that's when people like Kelder point out Josh Giddey's turnovers. You have to look at the level of responsibility he has in playmaking, right? Those are point guard indicators, not the profile of a player who should be moving on the wing and being off ball because that's where his strength lies in at. Now, his shooting profile does explain why some fans do want him to be used differently. And again, this is a conversation from both sides. I'm bringing over my full court podcast, my NBA podcast mindset. We're going to talk about all sides of this thing. 52% of his total field goals were unassisted. So that means he wasn't really being assisted on other shots. He was creating his own shot. That's what that means, right? 67.4 of his two-point attempts were unassisted. 80% of his three-point attempts were assisted, though, which means that that's where that growth in off-ball and keeping other teams honest when he doesn't have the ball in his hands plays a part into that. He shot 57.5% in the restricted area, 23.8% for mid-range, which is not great at all. The league average of mid-range is 43%. His step-back three, he only hit that at a 21.4%, and he made 36.7% of his above-the-break threes, which is a really solid number in regards to that. What does that tell us, though? That tells us that Giddey can create two-point opportunities with the ball, but most of his successful perimeter shooting does come playing off others and somebody else creating the shot, which is a really interesting point because usually when somebody creates 52% of their own shots, they're usually a better creator on the three-point line, but that's not where Josh Giddey is. But neither a conventional point guard or a conventional shooting guard can have that type of shooting profile. That's just the reality of it. And don't even get me into small forwards. It's not the reality of it. So the case for keeping him at point guard, which it shouldn't even be a conversation, but one, passing is his most valuable NBA skill. We know that. Passing is that. He averaged 9.1 assists, 41% assist percentage as well. He recorded 13 triple-doubles in 54 games last year. And also, the Chicago Bulls' offensive pace was 104.5 per 48 per possession in 48 minutes, and that which suits his ability to advance and run the offense, right? Moving him away from the point guard role means that who you're going to give that to. And that's another thing that's weird about this conversation. So you're gonna sit Norman Powell and play Josh Giddey as shooting guard? Are you going to move Modest Buzelis and not start Caleb Wilson and play him at small forward? Moving him away from guard has to come in specific lineups. When Tre Jones is out there, when you are running that, then yeah, he's going to have a little bit more off-ball duties because he's a better and more willing shooter than what Tre Jones is, right? So I think when you have multiple ball handlers out there, which is what you want, Josh Giddey can play in that. It's just not his primary role, right? I also think that his rebounding becomes more valuable when he initiates and runs the offense. The 8.3 rebounds per game that he averages, including a 20.1% defensive rebound rate, which is crazy for a point guard to have a defensive rebounding rate that high. The advantage is not about collecting the rebound. It's also initiating and being that outlet pass, right? And how he initiates that. When Josh Giddey secures the ball with the defensive rebound, you find a cutting Norman Powell. You can hit Caleb Wilson ahead in transition. You locate Modest on, the opposite side of the court as well. You attack, the center that's retreating and going on his back foot. And you can trigger drag screens for Nick Claxton by doing that. So again, it fits the point guard role. The size also. I said this at the beginning. His size is an advantage at the point guard that is just not at any other position in regards to that, right? I think when you look at the roster and how it's currently constructed, is that you have size at every position by having that. His size advantage is most meaningful for him because then at that point, he has that advantage when using it to his defense because, again, he's not the strongest player. He doesn't have the longest wingspan in regards to that as well, right? And I do think his previous production, it does show he grows with responsibility. During his first season, right? Giddey's best stretch came after his role on ball increased after the Zach LaVine thing and stuff like that. Over the final part of the 2024-25 season, he averaged 20.5 points, 9.5 rebounds, 8.3 assists, while highly efficient shooting in regards to that, again, because he had more of the ball in his hands. In 2025-26, he produced career highs of 17 points, 9.1 assists, and that was, he only played 54 games because of injury. So the evidence shows, again, that when the ball is completely out of his hands, his overall impact lowers across the board. And when you're building a team, you think about the ways that everybody can impact the game the best way, right? Now, I will say this, the case for playing him more off ball, right, and having situations where you have him off ball is that, one, he doesn't consistently bend defenses. That's just not the player that Josh Giddey is. While he can make excellent passes, and that creates an advantage for him, there's a concern about him to consistently create the advantage himself in the half court. In 2025-26, 23.8% from mid-range, 21% on step-back threes, 57.5% in the restricted area, and 56% true shooting overall. What does that mean? He does not have pull-up gravity. He has no ability with a pull-up game to create that gravity, which means defenses then go under screens, they retreat towards the paint, and that's where we saw like what Miami Heat did against us in the play-in, right? When you have Giddey controlling the half-court possessions, opponents cannot load the defense in the same way because of his ability to pass and the height advantage that he has in seeing the total floor. If you move him to where he's guarded more towards shooting guards and wings, that advantage goes away. The biggest case for him playing off-ball more is his catch-and-shoot ability. 37.8% from 3 in 24-25, 36.4 in 25-26, taking more than 5 attempts per game last season as well, and 80.6% of his made threes were assisted, which means that his perimeter success came from spot-ups, came from relocation, came from swing passes, and it came from defenses pulling away from him because he was off ball, and you can create that. So there is a part of that. I do think that Josh Giddey can become a solid screener as well. So you want players to be able to do things that are outside their skill set. Josh Giddey being able to grow in some areas off ball does not all of a sudden make him some player that needs to be playing strictly off ball. It does not do that, right? Now, I think that when you also look at it as well, sharing the creation duties because he has become a better off-ball player in a way, it does lower those turnovers some down for him, especially when you're playing with a player like Tre, but it offers its own kind of, shortcomings and limitations in regards to that one, right? Modern shooting guards are asked to do these things: shooting in movement, pull-up shooting, attacking closeouts, late clock scoring, perimeter defense, and off-ball gravity. Giddey currently provides two of those things. He provides closeout attacking and secondary passing when he's off ball, but he doesn't provide any of those other things. Pull-up shooting, movement gravity, guard defense, he doesn't provide those things. Moving him inside to shooting guard or small forward means that you're going to have to start Trey Jones. Now, having two pass-first point guards out there can help everybody else, but at the same time, what are the disadvantages that that's creating? And as far as the small forward, don't even get me started on playing Giddey at small forward because it removes the positional and size advantage that he has playing at point guard. You know, he's unusually large as a point guard, which I hope that doesn't sound offensive. At small forward, he becomes an undersized small forward. So what are we talking about? So with his size being a major advantage at the 1, it becomes a disadvantage at the 3 and in some 2 matchups as well. And it could worsen the spacing for the Chicago Bulls also, right? So I think when you look at it, for me, again, this is me, and again, this is me looking at data, and sometimes I can be too driven data. When you look at the ideal position for Josh Giddey, it's an offensive creating point guard, and that's what it is. It's a transition creating point guard. You let him initiate drag screens. You let him initiate pistol actions. You let him initiate dribble handoffs. You let him initiate the high pick and rolls now that you have better players that are able to do that, and he's going to be able to establish himself in that way, right? So I think the final verdict on this is Josh Giddey is a point guard. His passing, his rebounding, his transition creation, all those are his best attributes. That comes in that. Now, he can play shooting guard in some select lineups when you have other ball handlers out there. But then again, you don't have a lot of those guys on this team, and you need the other ball handlers out there with the bench because we don't have a lot of players that can create their own shot. Josh Giddey is a point guard. It is what it is. His best position is point guard, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to be forced to do some things outside of that, as every player is in the NBA. But again, what he does best, and when you look at it objectively, those are point guard attributes. That's my thought process. That's me. Again, I like to link everything back to data. Sorry I had to throw a lot of that at you guys. But moving on from that, last Facts or Cap segment for today is Noa Essengue. And has his future with the Bulls suddenly shifted after a rough summer league? Noa Essengue is still one of the youngest players in the league. And while, yes, I know that also is Cooper Flagg, but Cooper Flagg's a different type of animal and a beast entirely, right? Noah's path in regards to this one is about fit, right? Yes, he had a rough summer league. He was coming off of shoulder surgery and a long rehab process and all that. But at the end of the day, Tiago Splitter has made it clear that they need to see Noah in game. That's what Tiago Splitter has said. The staff wants more intensity, they want more balance, and they want more tenacity from Noa Essengue. And I don't think any Bulls fan is going to disagree with that. Noa Essengue is not out of the picture yet, despite what some Bulls fans will tell you about him and Dailyn Swain, but he is no longer walking into an opportunity just because an old front office drafted him. Much like we talk about these guys, he's going to have to grab that opportunity, that bull by the horns, and make it his own. And his development path has already become crowded. You have Caleb Wilson and Miles Buzelis as your starting front court pieces. You have Dailyn Swain, who was drafted by this front office, and even though he had a rough summer league, the priority may be to develop him because he was drafted by this. You have Leonard Miller, who already impressed last season and brings more physicality than anything we've seen from Noa Essengue yet. And then you have Jalen Smith as the veteran who's going to play minutes at the 4 and the 5. And that is even to save one of Isaac Okoro or Patrick Williams, who are still in the mix as of right now as we go into training camp. They also don't get ahead of him. Noah has tools, but he has to earn trust, and he has to show that those tools are actually going to come out at the NBA level, something that we have not seen that. The problem for Noa Essengue isn't just about how he's played or how he's not played. It's also how many players are standing between him and getting legitimate minutes on this team. So I think with Noah, what he needs to prove this season is he needs to prove that his length and mobility is real. His defense is going to bring something to this team that this team does need. And that while his offense is a struggle and it's messy right now, I think is the best word for it, he has to improve on his ball security, his contact finishing, the strength, the decision-making, the ability to get to that free throw line, which was a big thing for him. And so Windy City reps seem necessary for Noa Essengue, but it doesn't mean that NBA exposure is not still going to be there for him too. If this season is really about development as much as this Bulls front office says that it is, Noa Essengue cannot allow himself to disappear from that development plan. He's going to have to buy into that. He's going to have to dig down. He's going to have to fight for those minutes and for that opportunity. And if he does that, it could be there for him. So, again, and I'm somebody who I never count out players, especially this early out into their career. But I will say this, and I said this about P. Will years ago. Every year, your ceiling drops, right? What's viewed as your ceiling drops. Now, you can still bust through that and prove that that's wrong, but it drops some every single year. And it's up to Noa Essengue to prove that that ceiling is still something that he can hit, because the longer you go without showing those flashes, the harder it is to prove that to anybody in the NBA. And we'll see what's going to happen for Noa Essengue. But that's going to do it for today's episode, y'all. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys sound off down below in the comment section on how you feel about this. If you notice, I didn't give my verdict on facts or cap because, again, I want this to be a living conversation. So sound off down below how you feel about the Josh Giddey position, how you feel about the Norman Powell and the Bulls technically not doing anything to help the Chicago Bulls' future, and then Noa Essenge's future as well. Sound off on all of that down below. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys like the video, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell as well so you never miss an episode or a live stream. You can follow us at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. And lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that is thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right again, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation